Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas, everybody. This is David Hurley, the EasyChessTips.com maestro, otherwise known as the pub chess bluffer, who's on a mission to improve his chess and that of anybody else whose chess needs improving, who is not already an expert at the said game. Celebrating in the spirit of Christmas. Did I already say it's Christmas? I can't remember. It's Boxing Day today, anyway, St. Stephen's Day. And here I am celebrating the goodly saint with a nice glass of Frascati, you see. Not the usual swilling beer that I go to as my default drink setting on these occasions. Now today, it's been a while since I made a video, so today I'm going to go back in time to the beginning of September, to the eve of St. Nicholas, in fact, when I played the first game of this month with my regular opponent, Dr. M, in which I was white and he, therefore, was black. And I opened with my regular go-to move in all situations where I happen to be white. That is to say, D4. And we shall see how this game unfolds. Now, in the meantime, I've got some news about one of my projects, which is to develop a system for remembering 184 variations of this D4 opening. I've got them all written out, almost all of them are based on this book here, which I often show you on these occasions. John Watson's A Strategic Chess Opening for Repertoire for White. Well, I've been through the whole of the book. I've spent about the last 2 years or so doing it, and I have put the first 5 to 15 moves into at least a couple of notebooks now. This is the latest version of it, where I have all the moves written down in this kind of way, following through on all the variations, but not going right through to the end of his analysis, just the first set of moves, first 5, 7, 9, 10. As it went through, as I got through it, they got a bit longer. This one here goes on for the first 14 moves and so forth. Now, then the next thing I have done is numbered all the openings. So as I say, I've got 184 now, and then I'm attaching them. I've not quite finished this part yet. I'm attaching to each opening a number code related to the number. It's called the major mnemonic system, I think, the major letter number mnemonic system. You can look it up on the internet. Number 1 is associated with T, number 2 with N, number 3 with M, number 4 with R, and so on through the first, 10 digits. 0 is an S or Z. And by combining the numbers, so for example, the number 13, actually the key word I use for that is Tim. It's T is 1 and M is 3, and it makes up a word. With Tim, the vowels don't count for anything. Tim or time or Tam O'Shanter. I think Tam was the creator of this system, a very good salesman back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s called Dr. Bruno First, marketed this system. And I, the teenage version of myself, saw it advertised in a newspaper and thought it'd be a jolly spiffing thing to have a superpower memory. So I bought it and I learned the first part of it, and then it ended up stuck upstairs in the parents' attic or something. Now, what I have discovered is that it's all well and good going through the moves, the variations in order, because you can kind of remember the variations one from another in that way. That's the easy way of doing it. But what happens if you get some of these study cards and you transfer all 180 opening variations? There's a rather short one there of the modern Benoni. Onto the cards. Each card has the number on it. What's this number here? Where are we? 49. 49. I can't remember what 49 is. 49 is R, and 9 is something like P, isn't it? T, Noah, May, Ray, Law, Jaw, Key, Fee, P. So a P, and 4 is rope. Rope, it's the rope. It's enough rope, you'll hang yourself. And the enough rope and you'll hang yourself variation. There we go, rope. Rope is the keyword up top. There's also a slash to rip, because this is quite a slashing variation. This one is the Nimzo Indian. And the next thing I'm going to do, once I've got all of the numbers turned into keywords, and all the keywords transposed onto these cards, I will then study in more detail each of the openings, create stories related to the opening in relation to the keyword. Sometimes that will be, or in most cases, that'll be pretty bizarre stuff. And then the aim is to be able to shuffle those cards, pull out one at random, see the number, turn the number into the word code, which will then tell me which part of the which opening chapter I'm dealing with, which type of opening, and then that specific variation. That, anyway, is the goal. It will keep me fully occupied through the coming decade, I don't doubt. If that is, one is spared that long. But anyway, it's best to keep yourself occupied for the short duration we have on this planet. Where was I? So today, I'm going to look at one of the games that we played in December, earlier this month, the Eve of St. Nicholas, where I opened as white. Now, the funny thing is, my opening was perfectly okay, I think, but it wasn't the recommended opening that I have supposedly committed to memory using the memory card system. There's still a lot of work to do to get that off pat. However, Lichess, I should say, doesn't mind my variation of John Watson's variation at all. So here's how it goes. I open with D4. The answer comes immediately with D5. We've got 30 minutes each on the clock, counting down with no increment. D4, D5, C4, and E6. Looks like we're going into the Queen's Gambit declined. I follow up with the standard third move of knight to C3, expecting knight to F6. However, my opponent has slipped across by a transposition into the Semi-Slav defense, which is a very solid defense here. Now, this is where I forgot what the recommended move by John Watson is in this situation. I'm following John Watson for my memory system. However, I didn't play either of these recommended moves by Lichess. I neither played knight to F3 nor B3. And in fact, neither of those is what John Watson does or recommends in this case. Instead, I took the pawns. I remembered that in some variations, you nobble the pawn fairly quickly. However, I'll just take you through, and you can see that there is no great change to the advantage bar. It's not a bad move. It's a perfectly acceptable option to do, but it's not what John Watson recommends. Let me now quickly show you what John Watson recommends. So when C6 has been played, we're now in the Semi-Slav. He recommends E3. Now, I know he recommends E3 for the Nimzo Indian, but I had forgotten that he also recommends E3 for the Semi-Slav, the fourth move of the Semi-Slav. It, of course, builds up the pawn chain, and here the white bishop is protecting the C4 pawn, among other things. The possible downside is that this bishop, the C1 bishop, is locked in for now. In the variations that let's just play this through. I'll show you how it plays out. One version. This, incidentally, is number 30. What I'm going to show you is number 36, I think. Yeah, number 36 in the memory card system. Number 36, we're into the Semi-Slav, and 36 is M and J for jaw. But M and J go together to make the sound mudge, madge, medge, modge, whatever you want. And the easy way for me to remember it, especially now as we're in the Christmas season, is to call it the Magi. But I've spelt it M-A-J-I because that also makes Magi, which is a colloquial Japanese way of saying, are you serious? So when the Magi came, maybe lots of people were saying, are you serious? But we can use that as a template for a story that will help us remember this specific set of moves, which I will now show you. We have F5, the F5 break, G4, F takes G4. This is one option for black. Of course, there are many others, which we also have in the memory system, where black declines to take the offered pawn. However, in this system, then the queen comes out, like the Star of Bethlehem, I suppose. And then we have the knight marching forward, and the queen retreats the star hovers over the stable or something like that, the queen retreats to g2, which may cause some players to say, Magi? Really? Are you serious? But that is the standard move of this variation of the Semi-Slav, which I have named the Magi, or the Magi version. And you can see how a story can be constructed around a specific set of moves and then related to the keyword. So that's the idea. But that is not what I played in this game because I completely forgot about it. So instead, I nobbled the d5 pawn with the c4 pawn, of course. And there was a counter nobbling of the pawns. C takes d5, c takes d5. And here, because I haven't done the e3 move, I'm able to move my bishop out to f4 as Lichess recommends, I'm pleased to say. We then have the bishops are looking at each other. I decide to swap off bishops, partly because with a limited, this is a game of only 30 minutes each, no increment, as I've said. By clearing a few bits off the board, it becomes easier to think with the time available, or at least that's my idea. Developing, the queen hops over to have a look at this vulnerable looking pawn down here. I simply move my queen to c2. It seems like a nice position in this kind of setup. Knight to f6, and there's that e3 move. Now making the pawn chain and releasing the white squared bishop. Now, what happens next? There's a variation here. Oh yeah, let me show you what happens here. We get knight to c6, but before that, we've got a very nice variation. Let's go back one. I completely missed this. Once the knight has developed to f6, Lichess has shown me a very nice option which picks up a pawn and causes black some positional disruption and swaps off the queens. And it goes like this. It looks like the knight oh, that's what I did. It looks like the knight is sacrificing himself for that central pawn. And if we follow the pawn takes pawn variation, the queen can pick up the bishop in it. So now the bishop and the knight have been exchanged. It's a delayed exchange effectively, where white has picked up a central pawn. And you can see white has also picked up a pretty big advantage. Now, assuming that black does what is probably the most sensible option of defending the king with the queen, so the white queen has the option of picking up another pawn to go 2 pawns up, or swapping off queens, which causes the king to be displaced and isolated in the middle. But I did not do that. I played e3, which is a fair enough move. We're still hovering around the equality, slight advantage to white area here. Knight to c6, and then we have a3. I'm pleased to see a3 here is recommended by Lichess, preventing the knight from advancing and attacking the queen, or looking around for squares somewhere in the center. That's quite a nice square for the knight to head to. Bishop to d7, a developing move. b4, not strictly necessary according to Lichess. Should be looking to develop the bishop or the rook. However, after the castle, after black castles, I indeed developed the bishop. So not too bad so far. We're now in the middle game and no major disasters so far. However, I think at this point, with my queen bishop barrage aiming at black's h7 pawn, which is protected by the king and the knight, it's well enough protected, but this kind of barrage can often discomfit a player and cause that player to make a kind of defensive error, which I think happens here. It's not major, but it happens. And that is opening up the position in front of the king, just what I wanted, with g6. It keeps the barrage out, but it loosens up the position in front of the king. I then castle, as Lichess recommends, Queen comes back to d8. My queen heads over to b2, occupying, incidentally, this diagonal here, now that there's been some loosening, just in case at some stage further along it becomes a nice active diagonal. a6. Rook comes over, a little bit late for Lichess, but better late than never. Rook comes over, advance the b pawn. And we have a takes b, knight takes b, the b pawn. The rook moves back, a4. This is strictly not necessary at this point, but I move a4 up to sort of add some oomph to the knight's defenses, lock the knight in, as it were. Knight to e7, preparing for an attack on the knight. Of the two knight moves recommended, I do neither, but I do move the knight into d6, effectively allowing black to take the pawn. I'm kind of offering a free pawn here if black wishes to take it. I do have this knight attacks pawn, knight takes pawn and attacks the queen, with the rook now occupying this file and the queen occupying this one. A bit of a risk of a discovered attack from the rook. However, what happens here? The pawn offer is not taken. Instead, the knight moves away, looking for an attack, I think. And I indeed take it with the bishop. We have this set of moves here. I'm still worried about this possibility of an attack coming down here. I move my queen away, also offering some protection to the knight, and looking at this new open file over here. On we go. Bishop takes the pawn now, and I let the bishop keep the pawn because I want to get my knight into e5. There's an interesting little recommendation by Lichess, which might be worth exploring, whereby the knight once again offers himself as a sacrifice. What does that lead to? I haven't looked at this one. It's actually a delayed exchange, another form of the delayed exchange by the looks of things. But anyway, that didn't happen. Knight to e5, which brings us back to parity. Lichess doesn't like this very much. And then we have a little bit of dancing around by the queen to avoid being picked up by the rook should the bishop move off to somewhere dangerous. Now, what happens next? We have knight into e4, and indeed, knight now takes bishop b7. The queen disappears from the field of action, and this is perhaps the beginning of a big loss of any advantage, a big loss of equality for black. The theme, what does Lichess recommend here? Lichess recommends doing something about that knight. So the queen should stay on the back row, according to Lichess. But my opponent is still looking for a way through, if possible. As an old shogi player, he's always looking for some way to attack. I bring my knight back, and this is a big mistake here. So moving the queen away was not good, but it wasn't fatal. The queen, after all, could come back. You can see from my less than ideal moves, the advantage has come back. We've come back close to equality again. If the queen moves down here, it will perhaps... Okay, maybe not. Anyway, the point is where are we now? The point is that where are we? In this situation, we are not far from equality. However, my opponent decides to attack my knight with his f pawn, which is a big mistake, and we'll see why in a minute. Well, keep your eye on this important square here. That square is now unguarded. It's a huge advantage to white, and obviously white jumps in, and you can see why. I haven't done any pen work, so let's do it now. This square here is a very nice place from which a conveniently located knight can, such as this one, can come in and fork the queen and the rook. And by moving your pawn here, black has opened up this square for my lurking knight. So that's why this is such a huge disadvantage. And the hope for gain is merely a knight down here. It's not enough, and it also loosens up the defenses around the king. This pawn is in an essential position here. Lichess hasn't liked the move of the queen away from the main defensive field of action, and that followed up by moving the pawn was pretty much fatal to black's hopes in this game. Let's move on. How do things develop? We have that terrible f6 move. Knight moves in, forking the queen and the rook. The queen indeed moves to h6. The rook falls. The knight falls. And then the queens swap off. I mean, why not when you have built up an advantage? Just swap off material. And then I move my knight back to f3. So not only have I built up a material advantage against black, but I also have a solidly defended king down there, down on g1. However, what black is now hoping to achieve is something of a pawn storm. Can black pawn storm his way back into the game? Well, let's see how things pan out. Frascati, you can't beat it. Rook to c7. Get in on that 7th row. Give black something extra to worry about. Black moves back his bishop. And we double our rooks. In fact, although we want to double our rooks, it may have been better to have headed straight out to a1 with the idea of quite possibly picking up a quick checkmate on the back row. However, we doubled our rooks. Bishop comes here, still on the attack, still looking for a way through. Knight indeed retreats to e1. The knight has some important work to do a bit later on. Don't want to lose the knight just yet. f4, the pawn storm is still on. Now, what would you do? Would you take the pawn right away? As Lichess is in fact recommending, I chose not to, and I don't think it was a bad thing to do. I moved my knight away, as it were, but he's on his way back in a minute. We then see the knight, that's right, anticipating this exchange. So take, and it puts the knight further up the board again, getting ready for, this is a nice little square here to aim for, or to pick off this pawn here. We have bishop comes back, thinking he maybe ought to look after the defenses, defending this pawn here, the d5 pawn. Knight therefore hops into the other open square, and we then have the pawn storm continuing. Then what happens next? Then we get in. Now we're ready to swap off. So check, and well, we take the bishop back there. Perhaps we should have just taken it in the first opportunity. Who knows? But it gives us this further exchange, leaving white with a big advantage. A rook versus a knight is a big advantage indeed, which we will now put to use, like so. I wonder about this pawn move. You can see the advantage bar tips away because the pawn is blocking the rook's access behind these two important pawns here. This pawn here, kind of, although I understand that that we're still searching, black is still searching for a pawn storm. It's a bit like old Adolf looking for an offensive in like the Battle of the Bulge or something in 1944. So throw all your stuff forward, but it's going to leave you a bit vulnerable when the offensive peters out. F3, attack that knight, get the knight moving, bring the king forward, and swap off any pawns that are offered. Attack the knight. Attack a pawn. Yeah, well, swap off a pawn. Why not? And come over here. Now, what's going to happen? If the knight moves, then we'll swap off pawns. And this leaves, as you can see, this leaves white in a dominant position. almost just leaving the rook here prevents the king from assisting the pawn in promoting. It's going to take 1, 2, 3, 4, plus moving out the way 5. 5 moves for the pawn to promote, but it can be blocked easily by the rook coming down here or even coming over here. Meanwhile, my king can escort my pawn to the back rank and to the glorious promotion to queen status. However, that is as far as we recorded the moves in the game, because we both only had a matter of a minute or a minute and a half, or even less than a minute, I forget now, on the clock. So the moves came in fast and furious, and I think was it in this game or was it in the previous game where I got checkmate? But it was only with a few seconds remaining, like 6 seconds remaining on the clock. Perhaps it was the previous game. This game had a similar kind of fast and furious ending, with white coming out of this advantageous ending as the winner. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video and all the blather about my major mnemonic memory system, which will be wheeled out in all its glory through the course of 2020, quite possibly in book form as well. I can see myself making my millions as a chess book writer without actually being an expert through this kind of technique. Anyway, that's top secret. I hope not many people watch this end of the video. I'm sure they won't. So that will remain a secret, or I might just cut it out altogether. Anyway, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to anybody who happens to have watched this much of the video. Over and out now from your pub chess bluffer, David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com.